Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome to our presentation on sports and society. My name is Nadine.
Kenna.
I'm Rukuto.
I'm Jerry. I'm Brenda.
And before we start our presentation, you can just have a look around and see the different props that we have that essentially represent what we're going to talk about today. We have some football shoes, some jerseys from different teams, as well as quotes on sports. Yes, on the table.
All right.
Okay, so sports and society, right? So this is essentially looks at how sports influences our culture and values and how our culture and values are represented within sports. Additionally, we look at how sports influences major spheres of our lives. For example, politics and gender, youth, and how those essentially correlate. And then we also look at ideologies that are influenced by sport. So you can think of gender ideologies and how sports influences the images that we have of women and men. Also, you can look at race and how race is portrayed within sports.
Okay, so we began by asking ourselves, why is sport so important to us? And we realized that a long time ago, sport was never seen as important or as a pivotal part of society. It was always a form of glorified play. And in the article by David Goldblatt called Taking Sport Seriously, he shows how this transition has happened in the past few years. Now, sport is regarded as a multi-million-dollar industry, and for many people, for many nations, it is a central part of their national identity. So I have you think about like the English football team, or the Indian cricket team, or Kenyan runners, or baseball and NBA in the US, in the United States. Many of these countries base their national identity around sport, and what we chose to understand is why.
So I'm going to give you a brief rundown of the transitional period of sport. So according to Richard, I don't know how to pronounce his Norty, in his book, The Sociology of Sport, sport before used to be a game, mostly violent, and these games were mostly reserved for men. Also, through the advancement of technology, it saw that sport had rapid growth of fan bases, increased commercialization, and growth of fanaticism leading to rowdy behavior, especially during matches. You'd see that when there are derbies or there are El Clasicos or derbies are matches between these huge teams like Barcelona, maybe Real Madrid. Whenever there are those huge matches, they're usually characterized by violence, rowdy behavior, racism and insults. So in the late 19th century, that's when the first Olympics began in 1896, and the first woman participated in 1900, and we also had the first World Cup being commenced in 1904. Lastly, sport has become a means of survival and a form of employment for both men and women.
Okay, so the theory we decided to focus on was the feminist theory, and the feminist theory, as we know, it seeks to overcome the gender dimensions of physicality, sexuality, and the body. So we're going to seek to challenge the production of ideas of masculinity and femininity, and we decided to do this by looking at 5 major examples. That's what we're going to run you through. You will listen to all 5 examples and see where we're coming from and why we decided to go against the stereotype that was being created.
So under the feminist theory, our first example would be the way women are marketed in the sports industry. And to see this, we chose, women are often the face of corporate objectification when it comes to advertising, which basically means that what we see from female athletes is less of their abilities and developed skills, but rather their physicality and the fact that they're feminine being overplayed to a point where it's almost sexualized as opposed to like celebrating their abilities, right? So we saw this one example of the Sports Illustrated website where from the landing page there's only men, and here is a picture of American football, college the college series, which is a very popular sport in the USA. The whole landing page only has men, but the only place where women are is in the swimsuit section. And as you can see, it's very objectified images, playing and overplaying their sexuality. From this, we chose to question ourselves and ask why. Why can't women be celebrated in the same way that men are?
The next example that we did was the female sport journalist. So we were trying to encompass everything, and we decided to also look at the media and how it is for female journalists who are trying to report news in a male-dominated dimension. So female sports journalists operate in a very male-dominated industry, which often brings their credibility to question. In the 1960s, there was a case of a lady, her name is, what's her name? Susan Fonoff. So Susan Fonoff raised a case where she wanted to report news, but she was being barred from entering the locker room. First off, because she's a woman, and second of all, because most of these locker rooms you can expect are filled with men, because sports in itself is already like a male-dominated, industry. Second of all, SNE newsroom, I've forgotten what the initial stands for, but it's an American non-profit organization that takes statistics, found out that in 2012, there's 63.1% male and 36.9% weight. In 1999, that's up from 1999. In 1999, the percentage of males was 63.1, and then the percentage of female is 36.9. Funny enough, that percentage is still the same in 2013. And then in 2015, if you keep checking, it keeps reducing. That just brings into question how much penetration can female sports journalists get into this industry. And then female sports journalists are also not usually allowed to enter male locker rooms. That means it's hard for them to get quotes from the stars of the game. That means when they write articles, they are less credible. Because normally when you interview the stars and then you post the quote that they say, it's easier for people to relate to it, or easier for people to believe in it. Also, the space of publication for women on normal publication pages, like when you're writing an article, the percentage of space given to women is around 10% as compared to their male counterpart, which is around 90%. So a book we found interesting was Lady in the Locker Room. Lady in the Locker Room. I advise that all of you try and read that book. It's we read the synopsis, and it's a very interesting book. Something that we thought would be thought-provoking, however, was this young lady. As you can see, her name is Ines Sainz of TV Azteca in Mexico, who was harassed by men in a locker room. So Ines refers to herself as the sexiest female journalist. And before she was harassed, she was busy measuring the abs of one of the players. So essentially, what this brings into questions: are we just pretty faces, or can women be allowed to just be women, be reporters before they're females? Because she was trying to play her sexuality to allow her to get access to, first of all, the locker room, second of all, to get the news. So is it a question of her having to use her sexuality to get it, or is it the fact that we are already putting ourselves in that situation? So she's also something you'd like to look into.
So the third example we looked at was body objectification, and the example we decided to focus on was Caster Semenya from South Africa. She's a middle distance runner, and she was a 2016 Olympic gold medalist. She has a high level of testosterone, right? But what we see that happened here was that she was attacked. Instead of celebrating her victory, she was attacked for her masculine appearance, which caused a lot of speculation around her achievements. Was she liable to, do what she did, or what was it that made her win? That's what they focused on instead of celebrating her work. And we see that the Association of Athletics Federations insisted that she undergoes gender tests. And her body was being brutally scrutinized, and you can imagine what that had on her self-esteem. Wouldn't that, you as a woman, wouldn't that bring you down? Would that make you want to go on with your career, or would that make you want to continue with what you're doing? So we found that was a very special case.
Okay. So we also decided to look at major sporting boards, and these we particularly looked at the Olympics and FIFA. So in 2015, the SDGs actually adopted women's sports leadership as one of the sustainable development goals. So this goes on to show how women leadership in sports is actually very low, and various organizations are coming out to actually increase the penetration of women leadership in sports. So women usually head federations of unpopular Olympic sports games, and these are games like sledge dog racing, wakeboarding, and climbing. And I think some of us don't even know two of the sports that I mentioned there because they are not popular. Thirdly, we also looked at the critical mass theory that has been used to analyze the consequences of having women in sports. So basically, the critical mass theory, it asserts that for people to gain confidence, or for a certain group of people to gain confidence in leadership, they should have been, had a lot of years in particular leadership. So when people have had a lot of years and experience in leadership, that means the general masses gets them to have confidence in them. So we would find out that in sports, men have always been leaders. So right now it's very, very difficult for women to come in and take those positions because people are expressing no confidence in them because they haven't been in sports leadership for a very long time. So it's becoming more difficult to break that glass ceiling. So we're going to take a look at FIFA first. So FIFA's first female executive board member was Lydia Nsekera from Burundi, who's also currently the Burundi president, the president of the Burundi Football Federation. And this election, and she was elected in 2012. So since its inception in 1904, the first woman to be elected was elected in 2012, which is over 100 years after. Currently, the FIFA Council has 37 members. Only 6 of them are women. And why is it only 6 of them are women? Apparently, recently a quota was introduced that in each and every regional, so because the senior council is made up of the small councils from different continents, like CAF, UEFA, OFA. So in those 6 different continents that are represented by FIFA, they should at least have one leader. At least, and in all of them, they only decided to take one to show that it was, a jurisdiction that they had to follow. And in those 37 members, 8 of them are vice presidents, and none of the women is vice president. We go on to look at the International Olympics Council. And out of the 17 members of the executive board, only 4 are women. 33 out of the 35 international federations affiliated with the Olympics are run by men. The first woman to be elected in the executive board was Flo Isava-Fonseca in 1990. So from 1896, the first woman was actually elected in 1990. And in 1997, the first and only female vice president was elected. So we've only had 1 female vice president in the Olympics and never anyone else. So organizations like FIFA, Olympics, and Vic Health have come up with policies to actually improve participation of women. I know this year the Olympics Executive Board took up 8 bold recommendations that would actually help them in improving women participation in sport.
So our last example is the unequal pay issue between the NBA and the WNBA. So for those that don't know, the NBA is the Male National Basketball Association. WNBA stands for Women's National Basketball Association. Now the revenue for the NBA was $7.4 billion in 2017. And players earn 50% of this league revenue at the end of the season. Now, for the Women's Association, the revenue is $25 million, which of course is a stark difference from the NBA. And from this, women are meant to earn 30% of the league revenue at the end of the season. However, most women, even the top player of the league, doesn't even earn 25% of the revenue. Right? So of course you get excuses. So the first thing we hear is the NBA raises more revenue than the WNBA. So it makes more sense for them to for the NBA to pay their players more than the WNBA, right? But according to a false analysis. The NBA team brought 5.9 billion in 2016 to the as the league revenue, and but this doesn't exist for the WNBA. But according to some, also if you look at like things like ticket sales, endorsements, stuff like that, you realize that the WNBA earned about 51.5 million, right? So the WNBA does have the money to pay its players. However, they aren't putting in as much as they do for the NBA players. The second thing we hear is that you shouldn't invest in a league that doesn't draw a crowd and is still young and unstable. But last year, the WNBA had the highest attendance it's ever had in the two decades it's been operating, and they had the highest average of ticket sales since 2011. So that's also something that shouldn't stop them from earning more, right? So the third thing we hear is that we're losing money, right? But a clear example that this isn't true is the owner of the New York women's team is also the owner of the New York basketball team for men, as well as the ice hockey team. And he himself has a net worth of like 1.6 billion. So therefore it brings to question, right? Why can't the WNBA sell their players for cheaper players to get more money? Or why can't the owners of these teams, take on the tax returns or file tax for their teams instead of the teams taking on that pressure? Then finally, we look at how the WNBA hasn't been there for longer. Well, hasn't been there for long, but they have been able to get more fans than the NBA was able to in like the first 3 decades, and they've been able to do this in a shorter time than the NBA.
Alright, so basically to conclude, we just walked you through the different instances where there has been inequality or unfairness to women because of their gender, especially in the sports industry. We all know that sports is very male dominated, and a lot of women in this industry are having to push the boundaries. And examples such as Caster Semenya or the women NBA team, or the sports journalists, women who are having to push the boundaries. And from this, we can also see that sports are sometimes a hegemonic phenomenon, as they control sports media, and significant sports organizations dictate the role of women, and the media then sustains this objectification. So it's sometimes that the powerful bodies in sports, be it the sports boards or the advertising companies, dictate that this is gonna be the image of women and this is what sells. And then that is kind of carried down into even having the football team take pictures without clothes or things like that. It's kind of like imposed upon the people. So from that bears similarities to the Frankfurt School of Thought. Yes, so with that, we will conclude our presentation. If there's any questions or comments,
thank you. Questions?
The first question I have is based on what you said, and it's, I know you posed the question to the class, but I want to pose it back to you. In that, do you think that women have a right to use their sexuality for their own advantage in their careers?
Okay, so we had this conversation yesterday, and we were mentioning types of feminism, yes. And somebody said one of them is your female prowess. So in my opinion, because you're asking for my opinion, I feel like it's okay for women to be allowed to use their sexuality to get that, because it's a form of us fighting to break the glass ceiling. I don't know if any of you guys.
I think what I'd add to that is it shouldn't be that you have to. The idea behind this is not that you should or you shouldn't. It's also not to dictate to people what they should do. But what we kind of are arguing is that you shouldn't have to do that to get to where you want. It's not supposed to be a requirement. I don't want to be sexually objectified. I shouldn't have to do that. That's basically what our
So, pushing back on what Elsa said, considering that you're looking at sports and feminism, if a man should use his masculinity or sexual prowess as a man, will that be fine then, if you're saying that a woman can do that?
Oh, okay, I feel like what we're trying to say is that it shouldn't be about sexualizing the person, it's about the ability to perform.
And I think an example for that would be you see men also like be sexualized to a point. Like they'll take pictures with their shirts off or like take like very scandalous like pictures. Yeah, sometimes for marketing campaigns, it's true.
Yeah.
But they don't. That isn't like a representation of their abilities. They still can be pictured with their full kids running or being athletic or being powerful. It's not that their image is limited to that. Yes.
My second question. Sorry. In what ways do you think women contribute to their own negative experience in the sports industry?
That's a very good question. I think I'll take that. I mean, I would look at the case of Lydia Nsekera. I feel like she is a very established woman in terms of, sport, and she's done a lot for the sporting industry. So I feel like what we need to do is, when you look at when people vote, basically when they vote for those people into power, there are women who also get to vote. So maybe if women we start to encourage us voting for each other, and also start working on our credibility, because like I talked about the critical mass theory. Right now, our biggest impediment is to build that confidence. So the more we get involved, and the more we voice out, then we will get the credibility. There's an example of this Asian lady who's also part of the Olympics executive board. No, it's the FIFA executive board. Actually, she was bashed for not being able to pronounce, a certain sports person's name, right? And this is not something that happens to male counterparts. And instead, she was apologetic about it. And according to me, I don't think she should have been apologetic about it. Because mind you, this is a person from another continent. And it's not like she's doing it on purpose. But instead, she should have taken a bolder stance and, defined what had happened, and not necessarily be apologetic. So I feel like for so long we've been apologetic, and it's high time, we become a little bit radical to claim our positions as well.
Are there any questions?
There are no other questions. Thank you very much. Please take the floor to the side of the room. The white board.